Two boys, identical in every way, cross paths by chance, but one has a family, and the other was left behind. As they uncover the secrets of their shared past, they realize the truth isn't just painful, it's dangerous. Can they rebuild what was lost, or will the shadows of betrayal and abandonment tear them apart forever? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. 11-year-old Callum Prescott lived a quiet life in the small, sleepy town of Silverpine. Nestled between mountains and forests, the town seemed untouched by time. Callum spent most of his days at school, reading books or stargazing at night through his bedroom window. He had always felt like an ordinary boy, content in his simple routine with his mother, Ilara, who worked as the town librarian. Life was predictable, and Callum liked it that way. But everything changed one crisp autumn day during recess. Callum and his best friend Ezra were playing soccer with a group of classmates when he spotted someone across the field who made him stop in his tracks. A new boy stood near the swings, hands shoved into his pockets, looking around as though unsure where he fit in. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But when the boy turned toward him, Callum's heart skipped a beat. It was like looking into a mirror. The boy had the same chestnut brown hair that always seemed to fall messily over his forehead, the same vivid green eyes, and even the same faint freckle above his right eyebrow. Callum froze, the soccer ball rolling past him unnoticed. "Callum! What are you doing?" Ezra shouted, running up to retrieve the ball. "Why'd you stop?" Callum didn't answer. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the boy. "Who is that?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Ezra followed his gaze and shrugged. "Oh, that's the new kid. His name's Kier. He started last week." Kier. The name didn't mean anything to Callum, but the boy's face was impossible to ignore. It was as though someone had cloned him and dropped the copy onto the schoolyard. Without thinking, Callum started walking toward him. The distance between them closed quickly. Kier noticed Callum approaching and tilted his head slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. By the time Callum was standing directly in front of him, the two boys were staring at each other like they'd seen a ghost. Hi," Kier said awkwardly. His voice was soft but carried an edge of curiosity. Callum's mind raced. What was he supposed to say? That they looked identical? That he felt like he was seeing himself from the outside? "Hi," he managed, his throat dry. "I'm Callum." Kier's brow furrowed. "I'm Kier." He paused, studying Callum's face closely. "You look like me." "You look like me," Callum shot back, his voice firmer now. "It's weird." Kier nodded slowly, still staring. "Yeah. Really weird." The awkward silence stretched between them until the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Kier gave Callum one last glance before walking toward the school building. Callum stood rooted in place, his mind spinning with questions. Who was Kier? Why did he look exactly like him? And why did Callum feel like this wasn't just some strange coincidence? That evening, Callum couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. As he sat at the dinner table with his mother, he decided to bring it up. "Mom," he started, poking at his mashed potatoes, "something really weird happened at school today." Ilara glanced up from her plate, her gentle smile reassuring. "What happened, honey?" "There's this new boy," Callum said slowly. "His name's Kier. He looks exactly like me." "Like, exactly." Ilara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a split second, her expression faltered, and her usual calm demeanor was replaced by something Callum couldn't quite place, fear, maybe? But just as quickly, she composed herself. "That's interesting," she said, her tone careful. "Maybe it's just a coincidence." Callum frowned. It's not just that we look similar. It's like we're twins. Do I have a twin? Could I? Ilara's face grew pale. She set her fork down and looked at her son with wide eyes. No, Callum, she said firmly, though her voice had an uncharacteristic tremor. You don't have a twin. You're my only child. You know that. Her reaction was so unlike her that Callum didn't know what to say. Usually, she was calm and patient, but now she seemed nervous. She quickly changed the subject, asking about his homework and steering the conversation away from Keir entirely. Callum played along, but his mind was elsewhere. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the stars outside his window, Callum couldn't stop thinking about Keir. His mother's reaction had only made him more suspicious. She had avoided the question, hadn't she? And why had she looked so afraid? Something about Keir felt too important to ignore. Callum made a decision as he drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow, he would find Keir again and get some answers, because deep down, he already knew this was no coincidence. The next morning, Callum couldn't shake the memory of his mother's reaction from the dinner table. Her voice, usually steady and calm, had wavered, and the way she changed the subject so quickly made him certain there was more to the story. He had so many questions, but he wasn't sure if she would answer them. One thing was clear, he needed to talk to Keir again. At school, Callum scanned the crowded hallway, searching for the boy who looked just like him. He spotted Keir near the lockers, flipping through the pages of a notebook. Taking a deep breath, Callum walked over, his heartbeat quickening with every step. "Hey, Keir," he said, trying to sound casual. Keir looked up, his green eyes narrowing slightly as if he were trying to read Callum's thoughts. "Hey," he replied, closing his notebook. "So, are we going to talk about the fact that we're basically the same person, or are we just going to pretend it's not weird?" Callum appreciated the directness. "Yeah, it's definitely weird," he admitted. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Keir tilted his head, curiosity evident on his face. "Sure," he said. "There's a bench behind the gym. No one really goes there." The two boys walked in silence until they reached the secluded spot. Callum sat down first, and Keir followed, placing his notebook beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both unsure how to start. "So," Callum began, "I told my mom about you." Keir's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah? What did she say?" Callum hesitated, unsure how much to share. "She said I don't have a twin. But, the way she acted, I don't know. It felt like she was hiding something." Keir leaned back, folding his arms. "Huh. That's interesting." He glanced at Callum, his expression serious. "Because I don't know anything about my real family. I was adopted when I was a baby." Callum blinked, the words hitting him like a jolt. "Adopted?" Keir nodded. "Yeah. My adoptive mom's great, don't get me wrong, but she told me I was left at a hospital when I was just a few days old. No name, no birth certificate. Nothing." Callum stared at him, his mind racing. "That doesn't make sense. How could you just be left there? And why do we look exactly alike?" "That's what I've been wondering," Keir said, his voice growing more intense. "I mean, I thought it was just some freaky coincidence until you told me your mom acted weird. Now I think there's more to this." Callum ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. "I don't know how to figure this out. My mom's not telling me the full story, but I don't think she'll just come out and tell me the truth." Keir leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Then we have to figure it out ourselves." Callum's stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and fear. "How? We don't even know where to start." Keir smirked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I might have an idea." My mom has a box with papers about my adoption. She's always kept it locked up, but I know where she hides the key. If there's anything in there about my birth, it might give us a clue. Callum's pulse quickened. You think it'll tell us something about me, too? Keir shrugged. There's only one way to find out. The bell rang, signaling the start of their next class. Callum stood up reluctantly, his mind buzzing with possibilities. When are you going to look? Tonight, Keir said. I'll text you if I find anything. Callum nodded, though the idea of waiting made him restless. Okay. Let me know. As they walked back to the school building, Callum felt a mixture of hope and dread. What if Keir's box held the answers they were looking for? And what if it didn't? Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. That evening, Callum sat at the kitchen table with his mother, who was grading papers from the library's after-school program. He wanted to ask her more, to press her for answers, but her calm demeanor made it impossible to bring up the topic without tipping her off. Instead, he ate in silence, his mind racing with thoughts of Keir and the mysterious box of papers. When dinner was over, he went up to his room and stared at his phone, waiting for a message. Hours ticked by, and just as he was about to give up and go to bed, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Keir. I found something. We need to talk. Callum barely slept that night. Keir's text replayed in his mind over and over. I found something. We need to talk. What had Keir discovered? Callum's imagination ran wild with possibilities, but every scenario only left him with more questions. By the time morning came, his stomach churned with a mix of excitement and dread. At school, Callum found Keir waiting by the bench behind the gym, the same spot where they'd spoken the day before. Keir looked tense, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, and a manila folder rested on the bench beside him. Callum approached cautiously, his heart pounding. What did you find? Callum asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Keir glanced around to make sure no one was nearby, then picked up the folder and handed it to Callum. This was in the box, he said. It's all the stuff my mom has about my adoption. Callum opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly. Inside were several documents, medical records, a certificate of adoption, and a few handwritten notes. But what caught his eye immediately was a photo clipped to one of the papers. It was a picture of two babies, swaddled in matching hospital blankets, lying side by side in a crib. Callum's breath hitched. Is that us? Keir nodded, his expression grim. I think so. Look at the date on the back. Callum flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink was a single date, June 12th, their shared birthday. They knew, Callum whispered, his voice barely audible. They knew we were twins. Keir's jaw tightened. There's more, he said, pulling out another sheet of paper. This is the hospital record. It says one baby was left there, but the other wasn't. It doesn't say where the other baby went. Callum stared at the paper, his mind racing. That's why you were adopted, he said slowly. Because you were left at the hospital. Keir's voice hardened. But why wasn't I taken with you? Why would someone split us up like that? Callum didn't have an answer. He sank onto the bench, clutching the photo tightly. My mom, he murmured. She has to know something. She has to. Keir sat beside him, his expression conflicted. Are you sure she'll tell you? I mean, she didn't exactly seem eager to talk about it before. Callum hesitated. Keir was right, Elara had avoided the topic entirely the last time he brought it up. But this time, he had evidence. The photo and the hospital record were undeniable proof that they were twins. His mother couldn't deny it anymore. I have to try, Callum said firmly. She's the only one who can explain this. Keir nodded but didn't look convinced. Okay. But if she doesn't tell you the truth, we'll figure it out ourselves. Callum appreciated the determination in Kier's voice. It made him feel less alone, even as his world seemed to tilt further out of balance. Thanks, he said quietly. That afternoon, Callum carried the folder home with him, his nerves growing with every step. By the time he walked through the front door, his hands were clammy, and his heart was pounding. Ilara was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her back turned to him. "Mom," Callum said, his voice trembling slightly. She turned, a warm smile on her face. "Hey, honey. How was school?" Callum hesitated for a moment, then held up the folder. "I need to talk to you about this." Ilara's smile faltered as her eyes fell on the folder. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tightening. "It's about me." "And Kier," Callum said, stepping closer. "Mom, I know we're twins. I found the proof." Her face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the counter for support. "Callum, Why didn't you tell me?" Callum interrupted, his voice rising. "Why didn't you tell me I had a brother?" Ilara closed her eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Because I didn't know how," she whispered. "I didn't know how to explain why I left him behind." The words hit Callum like a punch to the chest. "You left him?" he repeated, his voice cracking. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes as she sank into a chair at the kitchen table. "I didn't want to," she said. "But I didn't have a choice." Callum sat across from her, the folder still clutched in his hands. "Start from the beginning," he demanded. "I need to know everything." Ilara nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "It was a long time ago," she began. "Your father, he wasn't a good man. He was controlling, dangerous. I knew I had to leave him, but I couldn't take both of you at the same time. I thought I could go back for Kier. But by the time I tried, he was gone." Callum's chest tightened as he listened. "You left him with Dad?" "I thought he'd be safe," Ilara said, her voice breaking. "I thought your father wouldn't hurt him. But then I found out he abandoned Kier at the hospital, and by the time I got there, Kier had already been adopted." Callum's head spun as he tried to process her words. "You knew he was out there this whole time," he said, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you keep looking?" "I did," Ilara said, her eyes pleading. "For years, I searched. But the adoption records were sealed. I couldn't find him, Callum. I swear I tried." Callum's grip on the folder tightened. "And you never told me. You let me grow up not knowing I had a brother." "I was scared," Ilara admitted. "Scared of what you'd think of me. Scared of how much it would hurt you." Callum stared at her, his emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. Anger, sadness, betrayal, they all fought for dominance. But beneath it all was a flicker of understanding. His mother had made mistakes, but she had also tried to protect him. And now, she was trying to make amends. "I need some time," Callum said finally, standing up. "But I'm not letting this go. Kier deserves to know the truth too." Ilara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said softly. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Callum walked to his room, clutching the folder tightly. His mother's story had answered some of his questions, but it had also raised new ones. And now, more than ever, he was determined to find the answers. For himself and for Kier. The next morning, Callum woke with a heavy weight in his chest. The conversation with his mother the night before replayed in his mind, her tearful confession about leaving Kier behind and failing to find him. He wasn't sure how to feel. Anger, sadness, and confusion all swirled together, making it hard to focus. But one thing was clear: Kier deserved to know the truth. Callum walked to school with the manila folder tucked under his arm, the photo of the two of them as infants safely inside. Keir was already waiting behind the gym, leaning against the brick wall with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. His eyes lit up when he saw Callum, but the tension in his posture didn't ease. "What did she say?" Keir asked, skipping any pleasantries. Callum sat down on the bench and handed him the folder. "It's true," he said. "We're twins. My mom told me everything." Keir's jaw tightened as he opened the folder, pulling out the photo and hospital record. He stared at the image of the two babies, his expression unreadable. "So, she knew," he said quietly. "She knew I was out there." "She didn't know where you were," Callum said quickly. "She said she tried to find you, but the records were sealed." Keir laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "That's convenient, isn't it? She couldn't find me, so she just gave up." "She didn't give up," Callum argued. "She didn't know how to. She left me," Keir snapped, his voice rising. "She took you and left me behind." Callum fell silent, unsure how to respond. He understood Keir's anger, he felt it too, but he didn't want this to drive a wedge between them. "She thought she could come back for you," Callum said finally. "But our dad, he abandoned you before she could." Keir's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Dad?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" Callum hesitated, realizing he hadn't told Keir that part of the story yet. "Our dad, he wasn't a good person. Mom said he was dangerous. She ran to protect us. She thought he'd take care of you until she could come back, but instead, he left you at the hospital." Keir stared at him, his face pale. "He just left me?" Callum nodded, his heart aching at the pain in his brother's voice. "Yeah. And then you were adopted." Keir turned away, clutching the photo tightly in his hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The distant sound of students laughing on the playground only made the silence between them feel heavier. "So what now?" Keir asked finally, his voice hollow. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Callum hesitated, then said, "I don't know. But I think we need to talk to my mom again. Together." Keir turned back to him, his eyes filled with doubt. "You really think she'll tell me the truth?" "She has to," Callum said firmly. "She owes you that much." After school, the two boys walked to Callum's house in silence. Ilara was sitting at the kitchen table when they arrived, sorting through a stack of library books. She looked up as they entered, her expression softening when she saw Keir. But when she noticed the folder in his hands, her face clouded with guilt. "Keir," she said softly. "I'm glad you're here." Keir set the folder on the table, his movements stiff. "I want to hear it from you," he said. "All of it. No more lies." Ilara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You're right," she said. "You deserve to know everything." She motioned for them to sit, and when they did, she began to tell the story again, this time, directly to Keir. She explained the abuse she endured from their father, how she had planned to take both boys and escape, and how the chaos of that night had forced her to make an impossible choice. She spoke about the years she spent searching for him, the dead ends and sealed records that kept him out of reach. Keir listened silently, his face unreadable. When Ilara finished, the room was so quiet that the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed deafening. "So you just left me with him," Keir said finally, his voice cold. "You didn't even try to take me with you." "I tried," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't have time. If I'd stayed any longer, none of us would have gotten out." Keir shook his head, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "You should have tried harder," he said, his voice breaking. "I grew up thinking no one wanted me. You could have changed that." Ilara's tears spilled over as she reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I'm so sorry, Keir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't change what happened. But I want to make it right now, if you'll let me. Keir stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, he muttered, walking toward the door. Keir, wait, Callum started, but Keir was already gone. Ilara buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Callum sat frozen, unsure whether to comfort his mother or follow his brother. Finally, he stood and said, I'll talk to him. He found Keir sitting on the curb outside, staring at the pavement. Callum sat down beside him, waiting for him to speak. I don't know if I can forgive her, Keir said after a long silence. I don't know if I want to. Callum nodded slowly. You don't have to decide that now, he said. But I think she really does want to make things right. She just doesn't know how. Keir sighed, his shoulders slumping. It's a lot to take in. I know, Callum said. But we're in this together now. No matter what. Keir glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yeah. Together. For the first time since this journey began, Callum felt a flicker of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but they had each other, and that was a start. Keir stayed distant for the next few days. He didn't avoid Callum entirely, but his responses were short, his gaze guarded. At school, he spent most of his time alone, his usual sharp remarks replaced by silence. Callum tried to give him space, though it was hard not to worry. He couldn't shake the feeling that his brother might decide to walk away for good, and the thought made his stomach churn. By the time Friday rolled around, Callum decided he couldn't wait any longer. After school, he approached Keir as they packed up their things. Can we talk? He asked, keeping his voice calm. Keir hesitated, then nodded. Fine, he said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. But not here. They walked to the park near the school, where the sounds of kids playing on swings and the distant hum of traffic filled the air. Keir sat on a bench, staring at the ground, while Callum took the seat next to him. What's going on? Callum asked gently. You've been so quiet. Keir shrugged, his shoulders stiff. I'm just thinking. About Mom? Callum guessed. Keir's jaw tightened. About everything. It's like my whole life just got flipped upside down. I thought I knew who I was, but now. I don't know anything. Callum nodded, his heart aching for his brother. It's a lot, he admitted. I feel the same way. But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. Keir didn't respond right away. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Do you think she really cares? He asked finally, his voice barely audible. Yeah, Callum said without hesitation. I think she cares a lot. She made mistakes, but she's trying to fix them. Keir turned to him, his green eyes filled with doubt. What if it's too late? Callum didn't have an easy answer. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the photo of them as babies, the one they had found in the adoption file. I don't think it's ever too late, he said, holding out the photo. We're here now, and we have each other. That's what matters. Keir took the photo, studying it silently. His fingers traced the edges, and for the first time in days, his expression softened. I don't know if I can forgive her, he admitted. But I don't want to lose you. You won't, Callum said firmly. We're brothers. That's not going to change. They sat in silence for a while, the photo resting between them. Eventually, Keir looked up. I'll give her a chance, he said reluctantly. But she has to prove it. Callum smiled, relief washing over him. She will. I know she will. The next morning, Keir arrived at Callum's house early, his posture tense but determined. Ilara greeted him at the door, her face lighting up with cautious hope. Keir, she said softly. I'm so glad you're here. Keir nodded, stepping inside. I want to talk, he said, his voice steady but firm. "But I need to know you're being honest with me. No more excuses." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "No more excuses," she promised. They sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where she had first confessed the truth. This time, Keir led the conversation, asking questions about their father, their separation, and why it had taken so long for her to find him. Ilara answered each question carefully, her voice breaking at times, but she never hesitated. When Keir asked why she hadn't fought harder to keep them both, Ilara clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "I was scared," she admitted. "I made decisions I thought would protect you both, but I see now that I failed you. I can't undo the past, but I want to be here for you now. If you'll let me." Keir looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "I'll try," he said quietly. "But it's going to take time." "That's all I ask," Ilara said, her voice thick with emotion. For the rest of the day, they worked on rebuilding the fragile bond between them. Ilara showed Keir old photos of their family, sharing stories about his early days that he had never heard. She talked about his favorite lullaby, the way he used to laugh when Callum made silly faces, and how much she had missed him every day since they were separated. Keir listened, his guarded expression slowly softening. By the time evening came, he and Ilara had shared their first genuine laugh over a story about baby Callum spilling spaghetti all over himself. Later that night, Callum found Keir sitting by the small telescope in his room, staring out the window. "You okay?" Callum asked, sitting down beside him. Keir nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. I think I'm starting to be." Callum grinned. "Told you we'd figure it out together." Keir laughed softly, the sound lighter than it had been in days. "Yeah, you did." For the first time, he felt like maybe they were going to be okay. The weeks that followed were tense but hopeful. Keir spent more time at Callum's house, cautiously rebuilding his relationship with Ilara. At first, their conversations were stiff, marked by long pauses and awkward exchanges. But as the days passed, the walls between them began to crack. Ilara's patience and sincerity seemed to reach Keir, and while he was still guarded, he started opening up little by little. One Saturday afternoon, Callum found Keir and Ilara in the living room. The two of them were going through an old photo album that Ilara had pulled from the closet. The album was filled with pictures of Callum as a baby and toddler, photos that Keir had never seen. "This one's my favorite," Ilara said, pointing to an image of Callum covered head to toe in paint, grinning up at the camera. "He got into the art supplies while I was making lunch. I came back to find the kitchen walls decorated with his masterpieces." Keir chuckled, his lips twitching into a reluctant smile. "That sounds about right," he said, glancing at Callum, who was leaning against the doorframe. "Hey, I was creative," Callum said, grinning. "You probably would have joined me if you'd been there." Keir's smile faltered slightly at the comment, but Ilara quickly chimed in. "I like to think you both would have been double the trouble," she said, her tone light. "It's strange to imagine how different things might have been." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Keir ran his fingers over the edges of a photo, his green eyes distant. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we'd stayed together?" he asked softly. Ilara's expression turned somber. "Every day," she said. "I used to imagine what you'd look like, what you'd be interested in, what your laugh would sound like. I missed so much, and I'm so sorry for that." Keir nodded but didn't say anything, his gaze fixed on the photo album. Callum decided to change the subject, sensing the heaviness in the room. "Hey, Mom," he said, "didn't you say there's a box of baby stuff somewhere? Maybe Keir has something in there too." Ilara's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You're right," she said, standing. "It's in the attic. Let me go grab it." She disappeared up the stairs, leaving Callum and Keir alone. Keir leaned back on the couch, his expression thoughtful. "She really kept all this stuff," he said. "Even when I wasn't here." "She never stopped thinking about you," Callum said. "She just didn't know how to make it right until now." Keir nodded slowly. "It's weird. I used to think I didn't care about stuff like this. But seeing the photos, it makes me wonder what I missed." "You didn't miss everything," Callum said firmly. "We have time to make new memories. You're here now." Before Keir could respond, Elara returned with a large cardboard box. She set it on the floor and opened it, revealing a collection of baby clothes, toys, and keepsakes. She carefully pulled out a small blue blanket, its edges slightly frayed. "This was yours, Keir," she said, holding it out to him. "It was the only thing I had time to pack that night." Keir took the blanket, his fingers brushing over the soft fabric. He didn't say anything, but Callum could see the emotions flickering across his face: confusion, sadness, and something that looked like longing. Elara continued unpacking the box, pulling out a pair of tiny shoes, a stuffed bear, and a photo frame. "This was supposed to be for both of you," she said, holding up the frame. It was engraved with the words "Our Little Stars," and inside was a photo of two tiny babies lying side by side in a hospital crib. Keir stared at the frame, his jaw tightening. "I guess he never wanted us to be together," he muttered, his voice hard. Elara's face fell, and she reached out to touch his arm. "I know your father hurt us both in different ways," she said. "But I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You didn't deserve what happened to you, Keir." Keir looked away, his grip tightening on the blanket. "I know," he said quietly, though his voice wavered. "It's just hard to believe sometimes." Callum stepped closer, placing a hand on Keir's shoulder. "We're here now," he said. "That's what matters. We're not letting anything keep us apart again." Keir glanced up at him, his expression softening. "Thanks," he said, "for sticking with me." The three of them spent the rest of the afternoon going through the box, sharing stories and memories. By the time evening rolled around, the tension between them had eased, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. For the first time, Keir allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found a place where he truly belonged. The days following their afternoon with the memory box were lighter, but the weight of the past still lingered. Keir was slowly settling into his relationship with Elara, though there were still moments of hesitation and unspoken tension. For Callum, seeing his brother and mother reconnect brought a cautious sense of relief, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't finished dealing with the shadows of their history. That feeling turned out to be right. One afternoon, as Callum and Keir were sitting in the living room working on homework, there was a loud knock at the door. Elara, who had been in the kitchen, came to answer it. The moment the door swung open, her body went rigid. "Who is it?" Callum called, standing up to see what was going on. But before Elara could answer, a low, gravelly voice spoke from the doorway. "Elara. It's been a long time." Callum froze. A man stood on the porch, tall and imposing, his graying hair and piercing eyes instantly intimidating. He didn't need an introduction. Callum knew immediately that this was their father. His heart dropped, and he glanced at Keir, who was staring wide-eyed at the figure in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Elara asked, her voice trembling but firm. The man stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the room and landing on the two boys. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. "So, this is them," he said. "My boys. You've grown up." Keir stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You left me," he said, his voice sharp and trembling. "You dumped me at a hospital like I was nothing." The man's expression faltered for a moment before he composed himself. "I did what I thought was best at the time," he said smoothly. "You were better off there than with me." "Better off?" Kier's voice rose. I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't good enough. And now you show up acting like it's fine? Kier, stop, Elara said gently, stepping between him and their father. He's not here for you. He's here to cause trouble. The man laughed bitterly. Trouble? No, Elara. I'm here because I've been hearing stories. About my boys finding each other, about you playing happy family. And I thought I deserved to be a part of it. You don't get to decide that, Elara snapped. You lost that right the day you abandoned Kier and tried to destroy our lives. Callum had never seen his mother so angry, and it both scared and reassured him. She was standing her ground, refusing to let this man intimidate her. But Kier's hands were clenched into fists, and Callum could feel the tension radiating off him. You don't get to show up here and act like you care, Kier said, his voice trembling with anger. You don't know us. You don't deserve to know us. Their father sighed, looking at Kier as though he were a child throwing a tantrum. I'm not the villain you think I am, he said. I made mistakes, sure, but I want to make things right. Elara stepped forward, her voice cold and steady. The only thing you're going to do is leave. You've caused enough damage. My boys don't need you, and neither do I. The man's eyes narrowed. You think you can just erase me, Elara? That's not how this works. It is now, she said firmly. You have no power here. Leave. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but then his gaze shifted back to the boys. Callum felt a shiver run down his spine as those sharp eyes locked onto him. You look like me when I was your age, the man said, his voice softer. You've got my strength. Callum didn't respond, his body frozen with tension. Kier, however, stepped in front of him, his voice shaking but strong. You don't get to talk to him. You don't get to talk to either of us. Their father laughed, shaking his head. You're bold, I'll give you that. But you'll come around. You're my blood. No, we won't, Callum said suddenly, his voice louder than he expected. You're not our family. You're just someone we used to know. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Their father's smile faded, and he stared at Callum for a long moment before turning back to Elara. This isn't over, he said, his voice low. You can't erase the past. Elara didn't flinch. We don't need to erase it, she said. We're just not letting it define us anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. Elara closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking. Callum and Kier stood silently, the weight of the encounter settling over them. Finally, Kier broke the silence. Is he going to come back? Elara shook her head. I'll make sure he doesn't, she said. I'll file for a restraining order first thing tomorrow. He won't get near us again. Kier nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Good, he said. Because we don't need him. Callum stepped closer to his brother, placing a hand on his shoulder. We have each other, he said quietly. That's all we need. For the first time that day, Kier smiled. It was small, but it was real. Yeah, he said. We do. The three of them sat together in the living room, the tension slowly melting away. They were shaken but stronger for it, united in their determination to move forward as a family, without the shadows of the past holding them back. The days following their father's unexpected visit were quiet but heavy. Elara kept her promise, filing for a restraining order the very next morning. She explained the situation to the authorities with unwavering determination, leaving no doubt that she would do whatever it took to protect her sons. Callum and Kier stayed close to home, the bond between them strengthening as they processed what had happened. Though the tension lingered, there was also a shared sense of relief that their father had no place in their lives anymore. As Christmas approached, the house slowly began to fill with the warmth of the season. Elara brought out the old decorations, stringing twinkling lights around the windows and setting up a small artificial tree in the living room. Callum and Keir helped hang ornaments, their laughter echoing through the house as they debated which decorations looked best. It was the first time in weeks that the heaviness of their past seemed to fade, replaced by something lighter and hopeful. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, Elara called the boys into the living room. She was holding a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age. The boys sat on the couch, exchanging curious glances as she placed the box on the coffee table in front of them. "This," she said softly, "was something I kept for both of you. I've been waiting for the right time to share it." Callum leaned forward, his fingers brushing over the lid. "What's inside?" Elara smiled, her eyes glistening. "Memories," she said. "Pieces of your early days. I want you both to see them." She opened the box, revealing its contents: a small stack of photographs, a tiny bracelet with the name Keir engraved on it, and a delicate silver rattle. Callum and Keir exchanged surprised looks before reaching for the items. Keir picked up the bracelet, turning it over in his hands. "You kept this?" he asked, his voice soft. Elara nodded. "It was on your wrist the day you were born," she said. "I couldn't take much with me when I left, but I held on to what I could. I wanted you to know that you were always in my heart, even when we were apart." Keir didn't say anything, but his grip on the bracelet tightened. Callum picked up the photos, flipping through images of two tiny babies bundled in hospital blankets. One photo showed Elara holding both of them, her face glowing with joy. "You looked so happy," Callum said, handing the photo to Keir. "I was," Elara said, her voice trembling. "You boys were my everything. You still are." Keir stared at the photo, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Elara, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm still angry," he admitted. "But I'm starting to understand. You did what you thought was best." Elara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "That's all I can ask for," she said. "Thank you, Keir." Callum watched his brother carefully, noticing the slight relaxation in his posture. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward it. And for now, that was enough. On Christmas morning, the three of them gathered in the living room. The tree sparkled with lights, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Callum and Keir sat cross-legged on the floor as Elara handed them a carefully wrapped package. "This is for both of you," she said, her smile warm but nervous. "It's something I've been working on for a while." Keir unwrapped the package, revealing a scrapbook filled with photos, letters, and handwritten notes. Each page was a piece of their shared history, memories of their earliest days, stories about Elara's life, and even letters she had written to Keir but never sent. "I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to give this to you," Elara said, her voice thick with emotion. "But now that you're both here, it felt like the right time." Keir flipped through the pages, his fingers lingering on a photo of himself as a baby. For the first time, Callum saw a softness in his brother's expression that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," Keir said quietly, his voice sincere. "This means a lot." Elara nodded, her tears spilling over as she reached out to hug him. Callum joined the embrace, wrapping his arms around them both. For the first time in a long time, their family felt whole. As the snow continued to fall outside, the three of them sat together by the fire, sharing stories and laughter. The past had left its scars, but it had also brought them to this moment, a moment of healing, connection, and hope for the future. That night, as Callum and Keir lay in their room, staring up at the ceiling, Keir spoke softly. "Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like something's missing?" Callum thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe," he said. "But even if we don't, we've got each other. That's enough for me." Keir smiled in the dark, the weight on his heart lifting just a little. "Yeah," he said. "It's enough for me too." And as the house settled into a peaceful silence, Callum and Keir drifted off to sleep, knowing that they had found what truly mattered, a family united, stronger than ever. This story is a poignant and emotional exploration of family, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. At its heart, it's about two brothers who, despite being separated by circumstances beyond their control, find their way back to each other. Their journey is not without pain. Betrayal, abandonment, and unresolved anger linger like shadows, but it's also a testament to the strength of love and the courage it takes to heal old wounds. The characters reflect the complexities of real-life relationships. Keir's anger and mistrust are raw and justified, yet his willingness to open his heart shows his strength. Callum's unwavering support highlights the beauty of unconditional love between siblings. Ilara's guilt and determination to make amends remind us that even flawed choices can come from a place of deep love. The story ends on a hopeful note, showing that while the past cannot be erased, it doesn't have to define the future. The bond the brothers rebuild and the family they reclaim is a reminder that forgiveness and connection are possible, even in the face of profound hurt. It's a narrative that encourages us to face our own fears and to believe in second chances.